How exciting to be in the final week of Advent, a few days till Christmas. And because this is the final Sunday of Advent, it is also the final sermon of my 4-part sermon series on the Cardinal Virtues. After tonight, you can rest in peace. No more Cardinal Virtues. But I think it's important that we understand the virtues. I think this is so essential to the life of a Christian. And to be a saint, one has to be a virtuous person. So tonight we're going to talk about temperance. That's the fourth and final of the Cardinal Virtues. But again, let's remind ourselves, what is a virtue? So every Sunday now you've been hearing about these virtues, and if you haven't heard them, you can go on our website, nampacatholic.church. All of the sermons are recorded or online. You can go to YouTube, type my name in, find them. So virtue. So you should now know what a virtue is. So if I asked you the definition of a virtue, could you give it to me? Well, of course you could, because you know it now. But there's probably one or two that don't. So for the sake of you, I will give you the definition again. A virtue is a permanent habit of doing good. A permanent habit of doing good. That means that doing good is what is the first thing that comes to us. It's our go-to disposition. You see, anybody can be good when you have time to plan it. But what about when life just comes at you fast in a difficult moment? For example, it's the middle of the night and you get up and your toe hits the corner bedpost. Bam! And the first words out of your mouth are, "God be praised." Or maybe they're not. That's my point. A virtuous person has cultivated goodness and has cultivated so much that our go-to response is that which is good and true and beautiful. Like, you don't have to think about it anymore. Our musician doesn't have to think about which key is middle C. He's practiced so many times he can just find it, especially under pressure. So to be a virtuous person is what we're after. And the good news is the virtues can be cultivated. They can be grown, just like our muscles can be grown or skill. Cardinal virtues. Cardinal coming from the Latin word for the hinge of a door. The virtuous life hinges on these 4 virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, which is courage, and temperance. Prudence and justice are intellectual virtues. You have to use your mind. Prudence is about using your mind and understanding, and fortitude and temperance are more virtues of the will and our passions. Temperance is considered the lowest of the virtues because it has to do the most with our passions. And that's what I want to talk about, is help you understand what our passions is. But temperance definition: moderation with food and drink. That's temperance. Moderation, a correct usage of food and drink. But when that definition was given to us like 800 years ago, they didn't have things like internet, smartphones, TV. So I would throw in there proper use, moderation with food, drink, and media. I think that's very appropriate today. But I want to talk about what our passions are. This is really important. We're human beings. I know that. We're human beings, and we are beautifully made. We're an incredible creature. We're different than every other creature on the planet. And what makes us humans in a distinct way is we have an intellect, we have a will, and we have our passions. Our intellect is that capacity of us to contemplate truth. So go ahead and try to have your dog do a Sudoku puzzle. That's my point. We are amazing what we can do. Nothing against animals, but we have something special, an intellect. And we have a will. Last week I talked about that. Will is the faculty for choosing things. So I could know that if tomorrow I have a really big exam, I should get to sleep tonight, but my friends are having a giant party that's going to go all night, I have to choose to go home and go to bed early. That takes willpower. It's a will. Make sense? And then there are our passions. Our passions are our appetites. Hunger, thirst, procreation, etc. That's the things that we share most with animals, and it's our most instinctual desires. They're not bad, but it's just part of us. Our intellect is our head, our will is like our heart, and our passions are the stomach down. Okay? Now, what's important about temperance is it helps us to take control of our passions rather than our passions taking control of us. Because our passions can do that. Hunger and thirsts and other desires, they can become really loud. And they can take over our lives. In other words, passions can take control of me rather than me controlling my passions. Has that ever happened to you before? If you think about it, my experience in the confessional, me personally and as a confessor, most of our sins are not intellectual sins. Most of our sins are because we gave in to our passions. We let them control us, versus having our passions be subjected to our intellect and our will. Temperance is about taking our passions, food, drink, media, other things, and having them be under control. Moderate usage. The ability, in other words, to say, no, down boy, to our passions. No. I'm in charge of my life. Now, I want to give you an example from my life and a friend of mine who is really tempered in the area of food. Father Justin Brady. You might have heard of Father Justin Brady. He and I are good friends. We were both assigned in eastern Idaho in the same place, and we would get together on our day off regularly, and we'd go mountain biking and fishing, and he takes his health and athleticism very seriously, and I, not so much, but I need to. And after we would have a big day, we would go back to the rectory and we'd make dinner together. And we'd have, a nice, healthy dinner. And then every once in a while, Father Justin would say, hey, you know what? I have some dessert. I have a chocolate bar. And he'd go into his cupboard and grab a little Hershey's chocolate bar. And he'd, take off the paper and kind of gently take the foil back. And you know how chocolate bars had little squares? He'd break off a square. Here you go. One for me. And he'd fold it back up and put it in the cupboard. And he'd have his little square. I'm like, those are bites. I thought it was half for you, half for me. What are you talking about? See, he was so used to controlling his diet and things that he can do that. He's completely temperate when it comes to things of food. He has the absolute capacity to say no. Where I, on the other hand, oh my gosh. So temperance then is learning then to control my passions, to say enough. No, I'm in charge of my life. You, stomach, are not in charge of my life, or whatever it might be that's tempting us in the moment. See, a virtue, to be a virtuous person is to have the capacity to make that decision to say yes or no freely and to be in control of that decision. Or do I just give in? I give in again, and I give in again, and afterwards just like, dang it, I did it again. See, temperance is an important virtue because it makes us strong as a human being, and it puts us back in control of our life. Because if we're not careful, our passions will take control. Because here's the thing, our passions will never, ever, ever, ever be satisfied. You keep feeding those passions, and they'll just want more and more and more. They'll never be like, I think I'm done for the rest of my life. Thanksgiving's a great example. You eat for 9 people as one. And you're like, I don't think I could ever eat again. And 6 hours later, you're like, is there more pie in the kitchen? Right? I mean, our passions will never stop, no matter what they are. They won't. St. Augustine coined it centuries ago. Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. But see, if we're not careful, our passions can really disorder our lives. And if we let our passions take over, ultimately that can lead to addiction when our passions completely take over. And you and I live in the single most addicted culture in the history of the planet. You and I live in the most addicted culture in the history of the planet. That's not good. So what do we do about it? Temperance. And temperance is fostered with sacrifice, being able to say no. Not only be able to say no, but purposely taking a good out of our life and making it less. That's why at Lent we fast. Let me give you another example. How many of us cannot survive tomorrow morning without coffee? No need to raise your hands. That's my point. And I've been in situations where someone's come in and has been a total grumpy head and has given the excuse, well, I haven't had my coffee. That's no excuse. See, I don't drink coffee. Do I get to have an excuse to be a jerk too? No. Who's in control of my life? I am. The power of the Spirit working through me. I can choose my actions and to be good. My actions are not dependent upon anything. That's the making of a saint. Now, I don't mean to be putting coffee down, but I'm just making a point that temperance is the ability to be in control of ourselves. And that's freedom. That's freedom. So the church throughout the ages has been brilliant and wise in asking us to sacrifice, particularly in the areas of food and drink, and now I would say in media, because it makes us temperate people. Up until recently, we used to not eat meat ever on Fridays. Do you remember that? Some of you do. And it's only in recent times that we've stopped doing that. But in the canon law of the church says we're still supposed to keep Friday as a sacrifice day, although eating meat is no longer under the penalty of sin. It used to be a sin to eat meat on Friday because the church was so serious about this kind of sacrifice. But then we decided in the midst of the 60s that let's not be so tough. And I don't think it's gotten us very far. So the church still wants us to sacrifice on Fridays because Friday is the day that Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice because he knew how to say no. And he is the example. And we look to Jesus Christ as the example specifically when he was tempted in the desert by the devil. Remember that story? He spent 40 days fasting and praying. And the gospel says at the end, he was hungry. And the devil came to him in that moment of hunger and said, turn that stone into bread. Could you imagine the temptation that would be? I fast for like a half a day and I'm like, where's the vending machine? 40 days. He must have been ravenous. But he knew what was linked to that temptation, so he said, get behind me, Satan. See, Jesus was so virtuous, he was so temperate, that he was able to, even in desperate, extreme moments, have total self-control. And the saints are men and women throughout history who were able to elicit extreme self-control because they practiced it over and over and over. That's the good news, is that you and I, maybe I might not be tempered in this area, but I can grow that. And so I invite all of us together as a community, let's grow in these virtues as a way to prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths. What a better way to make straight the ways of the Lord than to be virtuous. But remember, God has breathed his life into us so that we could do that. To have a permanent disposition of doing good in response to the grace we have received, being good, that goodness flows from us, so that when the day comes and we stand before the Lord at Judgment Day, my hope is that the Lord looks at all of us and says, well done, my good and faithful servant. And it begins with the virtues. So as we head into Christmas, God bless you with being temperate. Come to Christmas and I'll talk to you about feasting. We have times of feasting and times of fasting, but still, let us be temperate people who know that we are governed by our intellect, we choose with a concrete will, and our passions are all subject to that. God bless you.